Hey everybody, Spectre here. Still on this 25th day of October here. If you joined me for the morning show, in case you missed it news this morning, I said I had a bunch of extra articles in that I didn't really want to muddy up the morning show with regarding shipping and that, and so I figured I'd do a breakout piece here. So that's exactly what we're going to get into. Some articles that came through over the weekend I thought were worthy of sharing, and we'll get into that here now. So one of the articles that came through says with a record 79 container ships waiting off the SoCal coast, a scary supply chain solution emerges. As we discussed yesterday when looking at the recent dip in sky-high container shipping rates, there was some fleeting hope that Southern Cal port congestion had turned the corner. The number of container ships waiting offshore dipped to the low 60s and high 50s from a record high of 73 on September 19th. Trans-Pacific spot rates plateaued. The Biden admin unveiled aspirations of 24/7 port ops, and electricity shortages curbed Chinese factory output. And there we see the container rates and that highlighted there. So alas, it was not meant to be, and despite the very serious jawboning coming out of the White House, the time ships are stuck waiting offshore continues to lengthen. There are simply too many vessels arriving with too much cargo for terminals, trucks, trains, and warehouses to handle. And according to the Marine Exchange of Southern Cal, 79 container ships were waiting off LA and Long Beach on Thursday, yet another all-time record. And this is a graph that, if you've been with me on the morning show, we've highlighted this a number of times, depicting the at-anchor versus at-berth container ships. So in light of this record parking lot that has formed outside of LA, and of course we've depicted that on show as well, it is hardly a surprise that container dwell times have steadily increased over the summer and now into the fall, increasing to an average of 5.9 days in September, up nearly 2.5 days since the April low of 3.6 days, according to Goldman Sachs. And here they highlight San Pedro Bay weighted average dwell time in days, continuing to stack up since, probably about March, April, May time frame of this year. Goldman also notes that the proportion of containers that have been dwelling for longer than 5 days were 32.8% of total containers in September, up from 13.1% in the spring, and 21.2% in September 2020, when dwell time began to accelerate as consumer demand returned. And here they highlight San Pedro Bay percentage of containers with dwell time over 5 days from January 2019 through September 2021. And obviously you see where things really started to pick up was probably July 2020 time frame. Kind of peaked out maybe around January of this year, dipped back, and then has risen precipitously yet again. Says while it is obvious, it is important to note that the higher dwell times at the ports and terminals lead to less overall supply chain efficiency and can impact volume throughput. For example, JBHT recently reported during their third quarter 21 earnings call that congestion led to lower container turn efficiency to 1.62 from the end of second quarter 21. Chassis also saw accelerated street dwell times in the most recent week 40, at the Port of LA and Long Beach. August, weeks 37 to 39, averaged a street dwell time of 7 days, before increasing to 9 days in week 40 for 20-foot chassis. 40 and 45-foot chassis similarly jumped in mid-October to 10 days from the 8.5-day average over the previous 3 weeks. And here we see the dwell times in that 20-foot in the dark blue, 40 to 45-foot in the lighter blue, all of which increasing. It says it's not all bad news. In recent weeks, rails have seen an opposite trend as fluidity has continued to improve in their networks, starting at the ports, decreasing their average dwell time to 5.5 days in September from 11.8-day highs in June. Now, mind you, on show here this morning, we just talked about Union Pacific. They had increased profits in that for third quarter. However, they saw that the volume had gone down, and of course, they're pointing the finger back at chassis drivers and warehouse operations not following suit, being in 24/7 operations as well. So a little bit of a confluence here. As a result of the surge in client interest and supply chain issues on the West Coast, Goldman recently introduced the PMI Manufacturing Suppliers Delivery Times Index from IHS Markit to its supply chain congestion tracker. Purchasing managers respond to IHS Markit's PMI surveys, indicating if it is taking their suppliers more or less time to provide inputs to their manufacturing. Above 50 indicates that supply delivery times are faster, and below indicates that delivery is slower. Manufacturers have reported significant increases in delivery times, with the current index level in September at 16.6, down significantly from July 2020 of 47.2. And here we see that depicted graphically. On an inverted basis, the index has increased 62% year over year in September, reflecting the large increase in supplier delays. On a roll, Goldman then makes another patently obvious observation, noting that congestion at the ports ultimately leads to higher rates in ocean freight, and it can also have an impact to air and truck rates as well. To be sure, as noted above, while prices have started to abate from record levels in mid-September in ocean freight, don't get your hopes up. This is entirely due to another temporary lockdown in Chinese supply chains, a result of the reduction in manufacturing due to China's ongoing power crunch and energy crisis. They still increased 350% year over year in the week ending October 15th. Prices will remain elevated until congestion abates or demand normalizes. It is unclear when either of these will happen. And here we see West Coast ocean freight pricing, and that has gone up, and up from, in red here, this is 2021, July-August time frame, kind of peak, drop back, and then here we are, September-October, drop back, and now we're picking up yet again. Says more ominously, as of October 18th, air freight from Hong Kong to North America was $10.45 per kilogram, up 97% year over year from $5.31. So again, the knock-on effect, it's not just freight moving by water, but also freight moving by air. Goldman's bottom line is that the data the bank tracks for supply chain congestion lines up with company commentaries during conferences in August and the start of this current third quarter 21 earnings season. And it goes on to highlight some of the double pendulum if the economy is indeed like a pendulum swinging back and forth here. A couple of depictions of that. Surely this is a model. Supply and demand are closely linked, and short supply can increase demand, obviously depicting empty shelves, which I'm sure many of us are seeing around the country. The system needs to do more than just ramp up supply. It also needs to squash demand, or the wild gyrations will continue, right? That means inducing another artificial recession to cripple demand, something which we doubt the Dems controlling the 78-year-old in the White House will be able to stomach. Now think of that. You know, they've got a $3.5 trillion plan that they want to try and push through. They've got some steadfast folks like Manchin and Sinema trying to prevent that. There's some things that they don't like about it. Obviously, this has really nothing to do with infrastructure. Only 10% of said $3.5 trillion is really geared toward infrastructure. A lot of handouts and gimmies to their crony friends and whatnot. But nonetheless, you know, you think that old Nancy Pelosi is going to give the old plebe some more crumbs off Nancy Antoinette's table? I doubt it. So aside from that, over the weekend, we had a fire breakout on a ship that lost 40 containers off the U.S. Pacific coast. Now, granted, this wasn't down L.A. Long Beach area, but nonetheless. Says the container ship that lost dozens of containers in heavy seas west of the U.S.-Canadian border Friday has reportedly caught fire on Saturday. Until Walrus, according to radio traffic, 2 tugboats with firefighting capability and firefighting equipment on board have been tasked with helping put out the fire. And here's some visuals of that.
Assistance with the extinguishing of fire. I repeat, require assistance with extinguishing of fire. Over.
Jim Kingston, Victoria Crozier, roger.
So that was the radio call for the Zim Kingston, which was the container ship which lost the 40 containers off the coast of Vancouver. And it goes on to state, says the Maltese-flagged Zim Kingston is now anchored at Constance Bank in the Strait of Juan de Fuca off of Victoria, British Columbia. And photos published on social media show a fire broke out in the cargo area. Obviously, you can see the flamage in that right in that area. Not good. Fire video, very intense, a little bit closer up. Aside from that, it says looks like they pushed a flaming container off the Zim Kingston, so apparently they dumped the cargo overboard. Czech News' Nicholas Peskad reports early Sunday morning that 10 containers are now on fire. And there they highlight that. The ship itself wasn't on fire. 5 crew were to remain on board overnight to help fight the fire, and the fire was spreading, but not a risk to public on shore. There have also been no calls to abandon ship, but 16 crew members were evacuated, leaving 5 still on board. There are reports that hazardous materials in 2 of the shipping containers caught fire. This is the same vessel that lost 40 containers due to rough waters on Friday. The Canadian and U.S. Coast Guards are still monitoring the situation, given possible environmental hazards. Now, mind you, this is all while the purported bomb cyclone was going on up in the northwest corner. Presumably, that must have contributed to the high seas in that, potentially caused the 35 to 40 containers to get dumped. And so there's, here they highlight that next significant storm system for Sunday and the Monday is taking shape 1,900 miles to our west this evening. Fast-moving clouds to its south is the location of the jet stream, which will interact with the system as it develops and strengthens over the weekend. And that is their bomb cyclone and that they depicted. It says in April, reports surged of containers being lost at sea as vessels were being stacked to full capacity amid strained supply chains. The unintended consequences of packing ships full of cargo is that they become more accident-prone in rough waters. Add this potential risk to an already fragile supply chain that is experiencing record congestion at ports. So aside from that, port congestion could be worse than the Lehman crash, Flexport CEO warns. The port shutting down is worse than Lehman Brothers failing. Both can lead to catastrophic failures of all counterparties depending on them. But with Lehman, the government could just print tons of money to flood the banks with liquidity. Ryan Peterson, chief executive officer of logistics company Flexport, warned Friday after touring log-jammed U.S. West Coast ports. Peterson said his firm hired a boat captain to tour L.A. and Long Beach ports, which account for 40% of all shipping containers entering the U.S. He said during the 3-hour loop through the ports, passing every single terminal, we saw less than a dozen containers get unloaded. Now think about that. Joe just told us, hey, 24/7 operations, right? However, I highlighted a problem. You can go back on the channel here and take a look at what was going on, and by way of what's going on, especially with rigs and so forth in California, one might begin to understand why we're only seeing a dozen containers get unloaded in the short time that this guy was there. He said the twin ports have hundreds of cranes, but only 7 were even operating, and those that were seemed to be going pretty slow. He said the bottleneck that everyone now agrees on is yard space, and that terminals are simply overflowing with containers, which mean they no longer have space to take in new containers either from ships or land. It's a true traffic jam. The bottleneck right now is not the cranes, it's yard space at the container terminals, and its empty chassis to come clear those containers out, he said. The twin ports appear to be at a standstill, even though Biden issued a directive last week to keep them operating on a 24/7 basis. But that seems to be not enough because the resident has weighed the use of the National Guard to alleviate constraints. Peterson suggested a simple plan for the state and federal government to partner with ports, truckers, and everyone else in the chain to create temporary container yards that stack empty ones up to 6 high instead of the limit of 2. This would free up tens of thousands of chassis that right now that are just storing containers on wheels. Those chassis can immediately be taken to the ports to haul away the containers. He said it was necessary to correct the bottleneck because it's a negative feedback loop that is rapidly cycling out of control that will destroy the global economy if it continues unabated. Goldman Sachs' Jordan Alliger agreed and told clients to monitor the ports. He said the most notable congestion indicator is the number of container ships anchored, waiting to offload their freight, returned to 70 ships anchored on October 18th, after hitting a record of 73 on September 19th, compared to their pre-pandemic average of 0 to 1 ships. And here again, highlighting that. Peterson is right. The monetary wonks at the Federal Reserve are way over their heads. They can't print their way out of this shipping crisis they helped spark by unleashing unprecedented monetary injections into capital markets over the last 19 months. The circulatory system of the global economy risks breaking as port congestion worsens. Well, I can think of an idea. Even DeSantis has said, hey, we're going to open up ports in Florida. Why do we got to ship 40% of our goods into LA and Long Beach? Again, highlighting the fact that Newsom, per his recall election, fraudulent or not, the possibility was always there that California, by the regulations, would hold the rest of the country hostage. And it appears that is exactly what's taking shape. Aside from that, the questions asked is, are the U.S. supply chain disruptions deliberate? I tend to believe so. I don't think it's an accident by any means. Martin Armstrong out of Armstrong Economics says this: Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adamayo may have accidentally leaked the cause of America's supply chain issues. The reality is the only way we're going to get a place where we work through this transition is if everyone in America and everyone around the world gets vaccinated. Oh, there it is. Well, things will all just go back to normal if everybody just takes the poison dart in their arm. Adamayo admitted in an interview with ABC News, starve them out, let the dissenters suffer, and those who bought into this agenda will turn against them. Adamayo said that the Biden administration has already provided the resources the American people need to make it to the other side. Basically, everyone should give in to the vaccine mandate or face the consequences. They are masking authoritarianism as utilitarianism. The vaccine has not been mandated at the federal level in the U.S. yet, but it is apparent that the government plans to make life as difficult as possible for those who do not obey. Echoing the Fed, Adamayo said the inflation is transitory. BS, we talked about that ad nauseum. And as part of the transition, we are seeing higher pieces for some of the things people have to buy. That's exactly why the resident was focused in the American Rescue Plan in ensuring on getting stimulus into the hands of the American people so they'd be able to buy the products they need. Yes, that $600 stimmy check that old Nancy dumped off her crumb table was more than enough to do that, wasn't it? Yes, the government expects us, the great unwashed, to be thankful for their measly handouts to purchase unavailable products at an all-time high. There is a reason people have recently nicknamed the resident Bare Shelves Biden, with the hashtag Bare Shelves Biden and Empty Shelves Joe becoming a viral sensation. Although the Biden administration met the ports of Long Beach and LA, which handles 40% of the nation's goods, the promise of a 24/7 operation has not yet occurred. There is no estimated time of arrival for when the ports will begin 24/7 operations either. Some ships are allegedly waiting 12 days at anchor before reaching the dock, and over 60 vessels are idled in the San Pedro Bay at the moment. With one of the nation's busiest shopping holidays approaching, followed by ongoing seasonal shopping, the matter is likely to turn ugly. Taking it a step further, the Dems are also demanding the GOP pass the multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill and are now using it as leverage. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said, One thing that has not been talked about enough is Moody's finding about how the overall Build Back Better vision is designed to reduce inflationary pressures. Sure it is. So, if you care about inflation, you ought to care about not just the supply chain issues, not just the infrastructure things I work on, but also the provisions in Build Back Better, like paid family leave, like making it easier to afford childcare, like community college, that are going to give us a stronger labor force and help us deal with that major constraint on economic growth. Buttigieg also claimed that he knew with certainty that the supply chain crisis is expected to last well into 2022. Perhaps the issue will last into Socrates' projected political panic cycle for 2023. And so there you see it. They want to use this as a crutch. Do you think that's going to work very well for them come midterms? Probably not. So we'll have to see. Nonetheless, a quick update on where shipping woes and supply chain issues continue to plague us at this point. And of course, we'll keep eyes and tabs on it here on the morning show if you join me here throughout the week, 9:30 a.m. Eastern, and we'll see you back on the next one. Take care, everybody.